Welcome back to another episode of Fitness Split Breakdown. I hope y'all are doing great. Hope it's a great day, great week. Kind of picking up where I left off maybe 6-8 months ago. We had quite a few talks and chats about using full body workouts and ways in which you can kind of compare and contrast that with other styles of workouts, whether we're talking split routines or targeting X, Y, and Z muscle groups, per day. I wanted to build on some of that conversation, maybe review it just a little bit, just to kind of get our brains refreshed on, maybe what the goal of the training sessions are, the goal of all your effort is, and then really talk about the practicality of why I think this is likely the best method if we really want to see results, but also, talking about living in the real world, what makes the most sense? What do you actually have time for? What can you be successful with? I think that's one of the most important parts, because on paper, sometimes we look at some of the workouts that we've signed up for, or apps we're using, or whatever we're talking about. It may call for 4 or 5 days per week, when realistically, maybe I can have 2 or 3 really good training sessions. Okay. So I think with that being the construct and that being the frame of this conversation, what is going to be the most feasible, what's the most doable, what can keep you on track, what allows you to be sustainable as far as making this a, part of the routine without question. It just happens. So, when I brought up full body workouts, you can look into previous episodes. I'll leave in the show notes here which ones you can check out when I reviewed some of the research on full body workouts or full body programming compared to something that's common like a split routine. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these two terms, obviously full body is we're doing more compound movements. Compound being that we're doing exercises that require 2 or more major muscle groups or go and cross over 2 or more joints. So movements like your squats and your shoulder presses and your deadlifts and all those bigger movements that engage a lot more bigger muscle, require a lot more effort to do, or a bigger strain on our nervous system and energetic system to do them, compared to what's called like a single joint or an assistance-based exercise that targets a single joint and a single muscle, right? Like your bicep curls and your knee extensions, tricep extensions, those exercises that you really just target one muscle. Not that those are bad at all, because I think they're very important. They obviously help you improve the strength in certain localized areas that will then help you on some of those bigger, more compound exercises. However, if we're only in spending most of our time doing those, are we giving something up? Right? Could we be using our efforts and our time better to really drive results in the direction we want to see them? And when you think and when you look back into the history more of the split routines, those really have almost a bodybuilding origin. When we say, hey, I'm going to do, back and biceps Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to do chest and shoulders, or chest and legs, or whatever, however you're going to break it down. Most of the time it's kind of agonist, antagonist, or muscles that are kind of used in the same kind of sequence or targeted. So you're really kind of picking maybe 1 or 2 muscle groups that I can focus on in a single day, and then moving on to something else the next day, maybe taking a break or a rest day, then moving on to something on the 3rd or 4th day, right? So you can see where over time, there's many days in a row where we're maybe not really hitting or focusing at all on the muscle group, obviously because it has to recover. You need time from what you just did as far as the workout went, because when it comes down to it, we have to keep volume at a certain number, and volume is just reps times sets times weight. Realistically has to kind of meet or exceed a certain amount to maintain or continue to see improvements. And you can kind of dive into the research on this and kind of look at, how many sets per muscle group do I really need on a week in, week out basis to, achieve that? Most of the time you'll see likely somewhere between 12 to 16 sets per muscle group to really want to see and drive results. If we're talking about increases in strength, long-term, increases in strength or muscle size or both. And when you look at the split routine, it's great because you can really attack a muscle group, work through, a lot of volume in a single day and really fatigue the muscle. And, that can be a driver for seeing improvements in strength and muscle size, almost like that bodybuilding approach where you just hit that area with a ton of volume, fatigue the muscle, a huge stimulus where obviously we're overloading it in a day in and week out basis. So we're continuing to overload that muscle group. So we see it changes. Now, I think the biggest downside is when you think about, well, if I can only work out 2 to maybe 3 times per week, will I have enough volume, enough work per muscle group every week to see what I want to see, right? And I think it worked really great for a lot of us, or maybe it still does, because it's definitely works. It's a tried and true, proven to be effective. Only really, though, when you can train almost every day of the week. Because if we need to see 12 to 16 sets per muscle group, if I'm only going to, maybe it could be, some people could be responsive to 8 sets per week or 10 sets per week, but, most of the time for most people, it needs to be somewhere over 10 sets per week per muscle group to see improvement. So if you're doing the split routine and you only have 3 days per week, that means on that given day that you're targeting maybe chest and triceps, you're doing 10 or more sets targeting those muscle groups. Okay. Now, when I was, 19 or 20 years old, I could definitely do that. There was no problem in that. That was fun for me, and most people probably, because we enjoy being in the mode and seeing what we're capable of with no fear of the next day or the days following in terms of fatigue or soreness or capacity, right? And then longevity wise, every time, if you're only doing 3 times per week doing that split routine, that each day you're training, you really have to go all out. You're going to failure almost every single time to achieve the amount of work you have to achieve to see changes. So unless you love to do that and it's attractive to you to train like that, great, go for it. If, you're someone more like me and the people I work with, I need to use my training to feel better. Obviously, I want to look better and change things like strength and bone and things like that. But at the same time, I need to see improvement, but I also need to be functioning during, before, and after my workouts and feel better the rest of the day and the days following, right? So when I look at the full body, and this is when I started to, as I got a little bit older and, maybe my capacity to recover changes a little bit just due to other stressors and sleep and those things, I started looking more into that full body approach where I can spread out my volume over time, not tax each muscle group so hard each day, to where I do feel better after I train. Obviously, there's some fatigue and I'm tired in some areas, but it's not so much to where I'm lethargic, I can't move, I'm stiff, I'm sore for the next day and the days following. So if you think about, just for a quick comparison, if I'm split routining and I'm only doing legs 1 day per week, I'd have to do, I don't even want to think about it. I'd have to do, I'd have to squat likely 4 to 5 sets. I'd have to deadlift likely 4 to 5 sets, probably do some single leg, maybe either step up or a lunge or whatever. All right, 4 to 5 sets to achieve the amount of 10 to 12 or more sets per muscle group that I need to have, right? Compared to, what if I'm going to do, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I could do squats and maybe lunges on Monday with 3 to 4 sets of each. Wednesday, I could do deadlifts and maybe some kettlebell swings. And on Friday, I could do step ups and whatever other, mix and match, whatever you want to do as far as legs go. And this is just an example, right? That way I've really stretched and moved around my targeting as far as the leg muscles I'm really aiming for and hitting harder, right? Like in the squat and lunge day, I can go maybe load up the quads a little bit more. On the following day, I'm going to do more posterior with the glutes and hips and hamstrings. The day after that, I can maybe mix and match and change intensity as far as I'm stepping up. It's a pretty good kind of a mix between quads and glutes. If you're doing it depending on your technique, you can kind of shift the dominant muscle there. Maybe throw in some assistance at that point, some hamstring curls and some calf raises, but you really spread out the volume to where each day you feel much more fresh and able and capable of coming back and doing it. And you almost look forward to it because you're not as stiff and as sore. And, You also have to think about, like I mentioned before, the drain not only on your body and its ability to recover, but on the mental, psychological component. Because if you really go after it every single time you train, there will be at some point a wear on your readiness. There'll be a kind of a low drain on your drive and your focus to say, man, I got to get back up and do this again today, right? So we have to consider those things as well. It's like, what is the overall impact it's having on my nervous system, both on the physical part, with my muscles being ready, my joints and tendons and muscles being ready to move and get dialed in and challenge myself, but also in between the ears. I think that's the most important part is, can I get to a space where, I'm not dreading it. I'm not having to force myself to start moving. It's an easier conversation to get yourself from resting into exercise. And I think that full body approach allows you to do it, mainly from we're spreading out the effort, right? Our perceived level of effort is likely less than with the full body approach compared to the split routine, even though we're likely doing the same amount of work. And there's been some really great studies. I think I'd have to go back again. I'll put this in the show notes. One of my favorite breakdowns of an article was they compared training to failure and training, I think, 2 repetitions in reserve. So this isn't really split routine or full body approach, but it kind of has the skeleton and the bones of what we're talking about. And when someone trains to failure all the time, what ends up happening is by the time you get to your 3rd and 4th set of a workout or of a movement, you fatigue so much through those working sets that even though the goal is to get maybe 6 or 8 reps on the last set, you're only able to get 3, or maybe 4. So obviously you're working to failure, which is cool, right? It's definitely a great stimulus. It can be. It's a way to overload and adapt. However, if we're talking pure volume, you're doing less work over time, right? So your volume starts to slowly diminish. At the same time, your perceived level of effort increases, right? Because you're going to failure every time. So you're basically a 10 out of 10 effort every time, even though volume starts to tick and go lower and lower. Compared to that 2 repetitions in reserve group where, hey, let's say, I'm going to do 4 sets, but I'm going to leave 2 reps in reserve with each set. I'm likely going to achieve all of my repetitions that I've planned for each set, right? I'm not as impacted by the fatigue component of it. So therefore my volume stays high, but my perceived level of effort stays somewhere around 8 plus, because I'm not going all the way to failure every time. Okay. And I think the psychological part of that is the most important and most valuable, knowing that it's not going to be such a drain mentally and physically, and pairing of those 2 things, because I'm not having to go every single time till I can't anymore. Okay. Now, again, like I mentioned before, sometimes that training is very appealing. It is for me sometimes. Sometimes I want to see what I'm made of. But realistically, day in and day out, if you're training like that every single time, you're likely doing too much. You may not even be seeing the improvements you want to see because you haven't fully recovered from the day previous to have the capacity to work as hard as you want and then see the changes on the recovery end of that, right? So we've got to also consider what we're recovering from, and if we're unable to, then we've overprescribed our exercise and underachieving what we're hoping to achieve. So, I think we're starting to tie all these things together in that, we have to think about, again, they tie this back to the beginning when I started this. What's most feasible? What makes the most sense? What's going to allow you to be successful? Is it 2 times per week? If you want to start there, say, hey, I want to get 2 really good strength workouts in per week, which I think that's a good number to aim for, especially if you're getting started. If you're trying to do split routine, you're never going to have enough volume. And if you do have enough volume, it's likely overprescribing exercise to someone who's only doing Tuesdays per week to get that many working sets to see the changes you want to see. Compared to like your full body approach, you can spread it out a little bit more. You can pick and choose, 3 or 4 lower body, 3 or 4 upper body exercises, pair those together, see enough volume, but also at the same time not be so impacted negatively on the recovery end and being able to still do things the rest of the day. Okay. And also too, it's like, hey, I've got 30, maybe 40 minutes. What's going to make the most sense? Right. So it's planning, it's thinking about, if I have this short amount of time on this short amount of days, how can I get it all in? Obviously the full body approach is going to make the most sense. Okay. So, keeping that in mind is key. Also, too, when you think about if you're trying to get up to 3 sets, I think that's a great goal for anybody that's trying to improve and maintain strength. I think if we can realistically average somewhere around 2.5 to 3 full body, really good strength days per week, I think for most people that's going to be enough to, number one, see improvement. And number two, you're always giving yourself 1, if not 2 rest days in between, okay? Here's another way we can kind of tweak this conversation too and build off what we've talked about in the previous episodes, is if I know I have 3 days where I can realistically have a great solid 30 to 40 minute strength day, I can therefore likely have intensity be higher, right? Because I know I have rest times in between. I know I'm giving enough rest per muscle group, even though I'm doing, maybe it's work day, rest day, work day, still organizing what target muscles I'm using and giving some time where it's not the main focus, every single time I work out. Then I can change my programming just enough to where I'm still getting volume on that muscle group, but it's not taxing it so much where I can't recover from it, okay? And at the same time, I almost like to use either the very end. Let's say I've got, and this is just an example, let's say my workout for today is a squat, a lat pull down, or a row, whatever it can be, whatever, right? Shoulder press. So therefore I've got my 3 big lower body movement, upper body push, upper body pull. I typically like to throw in a really solid abdominal kind of full body exercise. Sometimes it's like a banded rotation movement, like a jammer style exercise. Sometimes it's like a farmer's carry, any version and variety of that. Movements that really require a lot of effort, but really kind of at the same time focus on spinal stability and embracing and engaging the abdominals and things like that. And then on the 5th exercise, I like to throw in an assistance movement. That just allows me to rotate through the week's time where I can target a single muscle group, because I still think they shouldn't be the main focus, but I think they're still valuable enough that I can really increase and improve my either durability or strength or whatever in a certain joint area that's going to help me improve on my compound movements or my full body strength, right? So it's, 3 big compound movements, a really fun, challenging abdominal core centric exercise, and then you can plug and play your assistance movement. And that's 5 movements. Doesn't seem like a lot. Realistically, it's not a lot, but that's the point. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be doable. It's meant to be approachable. It's meant to be sustainable, okay? I'm not saying this is the recipe you have to do, but I think it's valuable, and I think you can be really successful with it. And then if you're doing that 3 times per week, the next time you come in, let's say it's Wednesday, I can do my deadlift day, or I can do my hip hinge day. I can throw in a lateral shoulder raise, even though it's a single joint, or a reverse fly, right? I can kind of hit that, lat, middle trap, posterior shoulder with that. I can then throw in maybe I want to do a kettlebell swing or a hamstring curl. You can start to throw in some more of these movements that are targeting these muscles that we didn't hit Monday, but still kind of giving enough volume to the other muscle groups as well, okay? So it's kind of fun, I think, when you look at it from that perspective, because if you always have in mind, okay, I've got to do just 5 really solid movements here, I can kind of get in and get out. And realistically, you're just playing a time game in that I'm being patient enough where 6 months from now, if I did 3 times per week I've got enough time to recover. I can really challenge myself with intensity the days I feel good. I can dial back intensity maybe the days where I'm tired or I'm not responding to training, or I just feel like I need to dial it back. I can lower the intensity, but I've still accrued a lot of volume in those days where normally I would have maybe taken off or just not done anything at all, okay? I think it's the perfect combination for a person that's, maybe has family, we got responsibilities, we have a job, we're trying to squeeze in movements and workouts. I think that's an easy way to mix and match, still focusing on the compound movements, still rotating and making it full body, throwing and squeezing in assistance-based movements, at the end of that circuit. And it's not going to really affect fatigue or your readiness when you get back to that circuit, the top movements. You're still going to be ready to give it your best and increase resistance with each working set to where you're at a good spot, okay? Now volume obviously is a big way to change that, if we're not talking about sets, is, what weight am I using? If you're, I think a majority of the time, somewhere between 6 and 12 repetitions, I think that's usually a pretty good stimulus to see changes in muscle size and strength, but it's not so heavy, relatively to what you can do, to where if I'm always training at 3 or 4 or 5 reps, I think that's a recipe for, at some point, it's going to be too much intensity over time. Now, I think you can train somewhere between 6 and 12 most of the time, even at that full body approach. Maybe you go 12, 10, 8, or 10, 8, 6, or whatever with your 3 working sets. And then maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's like that 1 week per month, or maybe 1 week every other month, where you dip down into, maybe you do a 8, 6, 4, right? You can go to fatigue failure if you want to. Maybe you stick to that 2 repetitions in reserve and kind of see which one aligns best with, level of effort and feasibility, but also how do I feel the day and 2 following after that. So ways in which you can mix and match, still using that full body approach, just slightly changing intensity, given your timeline. Maybe it's every 4 weeks, like I mentioned, maybe it's every other 8, where you sneak in a higher, heavier lift week, just to kind of reset the spectrum of, all right, let's see where I am strength-wise. Let's get a good number here. Let's see where I was, see where I am, and I can kind of plot that over time. And most of the time, I think you'll like the way that trend line looks, when you look at the big picture. So, not saying you have to do either one of these. If the split routine has worked fantastic for you, and it still does, and you're a big proponent of it, continue with it. I'm not saying it's a terrible approach at all. I used to do it all the time. That was the time when I could exercise and lift 5 or 6 days per week, and I could really recover from it. Currently, in my current situation, if I can get 3 really solid lift days in, that's a really great week for me. And I still stand by that full body approach, because I can distribute my volume of each muscle group to where perceptively I feel like I'm doing less effort, even though my overall workload is the same, if not better, compared to splitting up each muscle group each day. I wouldn't have the time for that. I would love to do that. Realistically, I would love to be able to do that, but right now is not the time for that. So just think about how you're training now. Think about, if I were to go back 6 months from now and look at where I am currently, have I seen the changes I wanted to see? Have I been as consistent as I planned to be? Have I felt energetic wise as good as I hoped to feel? And if the answer is no, and you're not doing that full body approach, I think consider giving it a try. See if you can, stretch out and mix and match those and really focus on those bigger movements in, each of your 2 or 3 workout days, and see if you come back feeling better. If you do, then I think you're onto something. If you notice kind of being able to do those larger movements and still have the capacity and confidence in your technique, and energetically feel good and vibrant, then I think it could be a really solid approach to use and continue with. And then 6 months from now, kind of ask that same question: have I been as consistent as I wanted to be? I think you'll find that your answer will be more oftentimes yes rather than no. And you'll say, have I seen the changes I want to see? I think you will see changes in strength or muscle, or just feeling better. I think that's a great target to track on a day in and day out basis, is, do I feel better before I train than after? Or after, do I feel better after my workout than I did before? I think if the answer is yes, most often than not, then I think you're onto something, okay? So just other things to think about, but just kind of take a quick second, think about, your level of consistency. Think about the level of, feasibilities. Is it doable? Have I been able to do it? Or is it just frustrating because I want to, but I just find myself falling off the horse because it just seems like too much work or too much time, when realistically I don't have it, okay? So let's try and live in the real world, and let's try and do what we have time for and maximize that amount of time. So again, if you have any questions, if you want to drop a comment, or, hey, I would like to know more about this topic, feel free to do so in the comment section. If you're listening to this on something like a Spotify or an Apple iTunes, I would love that. It'd be great. You're always welcome to reach out on my Instagram at dr.nicktrubee at dr.nicktruby. And we can kind of go back and forth there as well. So it's always a fun way to kind of get some engagement going there as well. So again, thanks again for joining another episode of Fitness Lit Breakdown, and we'll see you next time, guys.